Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast, where we'll be starting to explore some of the intricacies and details around sub-maximal fitness testing, alongside some of the different cultures associated with different countries as well. Today's guest, I'm joined, and I'm glad to say, is Tzlil Shushan, who will no doubt give me a bit of stick for the way I pronounce his name, as well as over the last few years I've known him. I have never been able to pronounce his name correct. So thank you for joining, Sil, and apologies if I keep saying it incorrectly as well.
Hey Steve, mate, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today. I think
Thank you.
just for those listeners that don't know about your background, it'd be good to just get an understanding of what journey you've been on within the sports science world. Again, starting from where you were and then how you've ended up at the University of Wollongong right now.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Tzlil Shushan. I know that you English speakers find it a little bit hard to pronounce, but I can understand it. I have some English words that I have problem to pronounce, so it's equal. Um, So I've actually started the sports science journey probably like many others. I've been a football player that was forced to retire at about 18 years old, just before making the senior level due to an injury. And then I kind of needed to choose what I'm going to do with life, right? So I really needed the little push for my parents to go and start studying something that fascinating me and something that I'm interested in. So believe it was a few months after retiring, I've started an undergrad degree in physical education and sports science in Wingate Institute in Israel. Um, then I believe about the second year of the undergrad, I was so kind of overwhelmed and to be exposed to all these sports science domains and aspect, and I kind of knew that I really want to expand my knowledge around it. So I kind of decided to early on that I want to move overseas and learn a little bit more. So a few months after finishing my undergrad degree, I moved together with my partner to Spain to do a master's in high performance sport in Universidad Católica San Antonio de Murcia, which I spent about a year. Just flip a little bit and went to Portugal to do my research experience for a few months, and then got back to my home country. Then I was mostly working as a strength and conditioning coach and sports scientist for about 2.5 years, mostly in team sports environment, such as the Women's National Basketball Academy and Maccabi Tel Aviv FC football club. And then after about 2.5 years, I got the opportunity to move here to Sydney, Australia. I was quite fortunate to get the opportunity to work under Rick Lovell supervision. And I have to be honest, also for making the step into PhD, I needed a little bit push, and this time it was my partner that really wanted me to get a little bit more experience and knowledge for the future. So it's been 5 years here. Completed my PhD around a year ago, and currently I'm working in University of Wollongong as on an hybrid role as an associate lecturer and a post doc researcher. And alongside to it, also consulting with the FIFA Women's Development Program, and do some private consultancy roles with clubs and individual athletes as well.
That, thanks. And they always say behind every great man is an even better partner as well. So it sounds like you've got a very good supportive partner that's pushed you to get this. And you have to tell her thank you, because some of the work you've been publishing and some of the work you're doing within this space has been really fascinating. So thank you to your partner first of all as well.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. She's the driving engine, and also we had two girls here in Australia, so it's exciting, and
Yeah,
working hard.
exactly. It's like that's the thing, and I suppose like before we dive into it, because again, like we'll start talking about obviously we've both had the pleasure of Rick Lavell's Paul banter over multiple years now and stuff like that. But I suppose just to touch briefly, you've worked in a lot of different environments or been exposed to a lot of different cultures. Was there any differences that you saw like across like again Spain, Portugal, Israel, Australia when it comes to actually embracing sports science in general?
Yeah, this is actually a great question. To be honest, I feel quite thankful of being able to experience different, countries, cultures, languages, etc. In the last probably 7 years, and there is definitely there are differences in the way that sports science is embraced. Just an example, in Israel, when I've started, sports science was still developing. I would say that now we are in a better place in terms of some of the team sports like football, basketball, and of course individual sports as well. But still, considering the notion of high performance department or sports science in general, we are still far, far behind to Spain and Australia, for example. In Spain and Portugal, I had a great time that probably gave me most of my skill set to understand better what I need to do practically when I'm working as a practitioner in high performance sport, but also had the time to experience how research is conducted. And the time in Portugal mostly was the time that I gained lots of research experience. And finally, Australia is Australia. I've been very lucky to be here and learn from the best of the best. It always was. It was a hard move for us because we've never been in Australia. And the move was for 3.5 years, and at minimum, my partner need to. It's far away from family, far away from everyone, so she need to sacrifice a lot for me. And look, we are still here in Australia. We are loving it, and I feel that I getting better and better and have more opportunities every day. And of course, I have to admit that this is mostly thanks to Rick Lovell and early on to Jason Siegler as well for giving me the opportunity of coming here. And more than that, give me the freedom of choosing my research and do everything that I can and want and not be forced to do something specific.
Because again, I suppose like the different kind of experiences you have probably like helped to guide you to this direction as well. And even though you've been in Australia, the two people you just described, you've got an English sports scientist by trade and an American sports scientist by trade as well. So there's definitely a lot more influences coming into your practice than simply just the Australian sports science culture, shall we say?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I think it was a perfect fit because me and Rick we've been on the same wavelength from the beginning, I believe. But at the same time, it probably took me about a year of exploring what I want to do as part of my PhD. I was not directed into a specific topic or research area, and I had the entire freedom to choose what I want to explore and what I want to do more. So this process was long. During this process, I had the opportunity to meet you, to meet other great colleagues and mentors like Sean McLaren, Martin Boucher, Tanit Scott, Antonio Deloyacono, and work together kind of as a group that each of us is in different place in the world, but doing a good research together that everyone is influencing and contributing to this research.
Well, it was funny. Like you mentioned, like Sean and Tanith as part of that. I remember like we were doing some work with Tanith, and when he was at the Brisbane Broncos, and we had a WhatsApp group, and all I remember is like saying none of us had the time. We were all practitioners, busy within the own environment, and then you came along, and it was like answered all our prayers, kind of thing, to help get this kind of topic up and running as well. So a lot of thank you as well. So how did you actually come to actually finalising the research question then for your PhD? Because it must have been a bit daunting, like coming across from moving all your family, then going, right, I don't know what I'm doing for the first year or so. Like, yeah, how did it come about?
Um, that's a good question. I have to be honest. I'm not sure I have a precise answer, but what I may say that I probably changed my mind 20 times during the first 4 or 6 months of my PhD. Rick was always in a place that, yeah, you come to us with what you want to do. We're not going to direct you to anything. And, the area of sub-maximal fitness tests or sub-maximal monitoring in general, it's been for a long time. We all know the great work that Martin did in the early 2000s, and also some of the work that came from endurance athletes. I think that I wanted to challenge a little bit more the way that we monitor our athletes and the way that we gain insights about the decision making that we are making, and if we can monitor a little bit more using pragmatic approaches or non-invasive, if you want, within the environment of training, rather just outside this environment. So I think, after having many roundtables with, of course, with my supervisor and some other people around, I felt that is a perfect fit to kind of dive again into sub-maximal fitness test and what we can do with this tool, and whether we can learn more about the way that we make decisions about how athletes are moving forward. And this is with the notion of doing something that is much, much more pragmatic compared to other approaches.
Yeah, and it's great. And I suppose, like, before we dive too much into your PhD, and hopefully this doesn't seem like a second Viva for you as well, it'd be good to just give a brief overview of what actually is submaximal fitness testing as well, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, so I think the notion or the way that we describe or define submaximal fitness test is you're choosing a protocol that it basically creates any kind of a stimulus on the athlete. It's usually in team sport, it will be running protocol, it might be cycling, but mostly running, that will basically do not take the athletes into their maximum or close to their maximum. And we can do it as part of the training environment. In relation to the stimulus, we can monitor different outcome measures that may represent different proxies of physiological systems, such as the cardiovascular, physiological, if you want, mechanical or subjective. And we trying to infer about what's happening with this physiological system. And this is what we basically refer to as a physiological state, which may subsequently give us better insight about training effect, whether it's a positive or negative training effect. It's quite broad. As part of my PhD, we try to narrow it down into different modalities, categories, and how you really work around the programming variables and what are the outcome measures that you can collect either doing the exercise or immediately following the exercise.
Nice, thank you. You can tell you studied it for a long time with such a clear definition like that as well, by the way, as well. So,
I'll definitely define it better in writing, but yeah, I really felt that we had lots of bouncing idea regarding how to call it. It doesn't really need to be catchy or anything, but it need to represent something that is more general rather than just something specific. So we narrow it down to sub-maximal fitness test, and then we try to provide some concise description about what this might include in relation to the stimulus and also in relation to the responses that we are collecting.
I suppose, like, obviously, like, traditionally, we've always done testing to a maximal state as well. So, to max tests, like, from aerobic capacity as an example, like, where do you think the biggest differences are within, like, maximal versus submaximal testing as well?
Yeah, so I believe that nowadays in modern sports science, or even before, it will be almost impossible to expose our athletes to maximal testing. specifically if we are speaking cardiovascular, and on top of it, if we need to bring them into the lab, if we are lucky, it might happen once or twice during the year or the season, and this usually takes part early on in the preseason and maybe just after the preseason finishes. The idea around sub-maximal fitness test is first to have something that is a bit more pragmatic for us to do, to be able to do it as part of the training warm up, for example, and also give us the notion of like serial or repeated measurements that we can make more and more data points per individual to understand the overall trend. So I think this is the main difference. That although we would love to push them into maximum, people will argue that it might be more appropriate or more accurate. Although we know that there are so many potential confounder when we are pushing athletes into maximum as well. The notion of having something that is a little bit more pragmatic and feasible to do throughout the season, possibly every week or every few days.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose it's interesting. How have you found like the validity of submaximal tests throughout different fitness stages? I know we're going a bit off topic here, but obviously you would have explored this as part of the PhD and everything else. So yeah, how does that kind of like relationship change at different status of fitness, shall we say?
Yeah, so I think if we're speaking about cardiorespiratory fitness or aerobic fitness in general, we first need to understand what would be the outcome measures that can give us insight in terms of a theoretical physiological mechanism that will give us an understanding about changes in aerobic fitness. And it makes sense that heart rate derived indices such as exercise heart rate throughout the activity or heart rate recovery following the activity might be a better fit, because we know that usually heart rate has a quite good relationship with the intensity and oxygen demand. And we theoretically assume that if for the same individual we see lower heart rate in relation to the same external stimulus, chronically, they may improve the aerobic fitness. And this has been noted in different studies in team sport, but it was not as concise. And there were so this is why we first decided to understand what are the measurement properties of exercise heart rate during submaximal fitness tests. And we came after the first review that was more a framework. We came with this meta-analysis of exercise heart rate. And indeed, we found that if we're taking a bunch of individuals together and we know the heart rate maximum, for example, and we basically plot them against their heart rate maximum, usually players that have lower heart rate in relation to their heart rate max will exhibit better maximal performance if we push them into maximal test. First of all, it's great, but it still gives us an understanding on between individual. It's kind of a ranking approach. We can rank the athletes quite good, but it doesn't give us the full understanding of, the natural monitoring that we're trying to understand is what's happened within individual across time. And this is something that we try to answer longer afterwards in one of the other PhD projects. But if we're speaking generally about the validity, our meta-analysis suggested that exercise heart rate can provide a good proxy indicator of aerobic fitness. We've also explored the effect of different programming variables, such as the duration, the intensity of the exercise, etc. And we found that there is a trivial effect. So it means that you don't need to push the athletes harder in order to get similar results. And with regards to duration, we found that somewhere around 3 to 4 minutes is probably the way to go if you're choosing a continuous, fixed, basically continuous run in a fixed intensity, which will be probably the preferred approach if you're looking for monitor exercise heart rate. Yeah, these were the main findings, I would say.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And it's like that's the fascinating thing, I suppose. Like within our industry, we've kind of, due to technological advances, we kind of come away from like the heart rate, which is sad to see sometimes, especially from the early days. And I have this conversation quite regularly. Is that like it's how useful heart rate and physiological indices can actually be within our field as well. Like, did you start to explore as part of your PhD different kind of methods within monitoring submaximal tests? So we talked a lot about the internal response to a certain external dose, like so exploring the dose response. Was there anything else you started to explore which is currently being utilized elsewhere within like the field of submax testing?
Yeah, so the general notion is that you can basically monitor three different variables type, if you want, or outcome measure types. The first one will be mostly cardiovascular or physiological. Heart rate will be the most feasible because it's not so feasible to take blood or to measure oxygen demand in the field with a squad of, I don't know, 20 to 40 players. Rating of passive exertion might be an option, but again, it might be quite hard to collect 40 different RPEs within a short time frame after a sub-maximal fitness test. Although people may argue that it might be possible in specific environments that you have enough, resources and staff, etc. And the last part, which getting quite big attraction at the moment, is what we can do mechanically. Can we monitor? Can we use different technologies to monitor the neuromuscular status of the athletes? So there's been lots of work around it, and I think part of our PhD was about the measurement properties of this micro technology as part of different iron intensities and things like that. And so, as part of my PhD, we've used different technologies. We've used scapula-mounted GPS and accelerometry as used before. We've also explored the utility of foot-mounted accelerometry with PlayerMaker, and we've tried to understand what is their impact on the measurement properties if we are using different modalities or protocol of submaximal fitness tests. The notion of using them in the field, I think, at the moment is quite hard. I haven't discussed with someone that actually making real decision making ideas or training decisions based on this. And I'll give you one example. For example, it's quite known, or it's quite common that practitioners that or researchers that are using GPS or accelerometry derived data between scapula, they are using the vertical accelerometer output during the standardized one. It might be a continuous one. It's most commonly done on high intensity burst, or what we classify as intermittent fixed protocol, that you basically run usually in a higher intensity for somewhere around between 8 to 12 seconds. Most of the research we're conducting was somewhere around 18 to 22 to 24 kilometers per hour on average. You rest a bit and you do it again, and it can be used as part of the priming activity of your warm-up. But for example, in the research at the moment, changes in vertical accelerometer can, for example, increase in vertical accelerometer can first indicate improved neuromuscular status. You are basically punching the ground better. You're using a mechanism that actually increase your center of mass, because your ability to punch the ground quite good and to create more vertical forces that will translate into better leg stiffness eventually. The other notion would say that, and there are a few studies that actually found opposite result, that your inability to dissipate the forces while you're running create a greater displacement of center of mass. Usually, instead of going up while punching the ground, you're going down. You're not dissipating the forces, and this create exact same notion of changes in accelerometer. I know that at the moment there are some more advanced technique of using it, and it's been fascinating to see how this evolving. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see if we can more confident of what we're doing. The other part will be, okay, can we monitor directly from the foot, and then we will gain better insight of what's happening with what we are looking, which is actually lower limb, right? And interestingly, the work that we've done at the moment is mostly around the reliability. We try to get as much technology as we can for the same run between scapula. We've used foot-mounted accelerometry, heart rate, etc., etc. We've used different protocols of continuous protocols that were on different intensities. We've used different intermittent protocols to understand what is the overall reliability of all these different protocol technologies and some other techniques of analysis that this is quite, well, I would say, sophisticated, I would say, to get all this modeling approach to understand where is the constant phase of the run versus the acceleration, deceleration, etc. And we basically found that contact time from foot accelerometry technology was the most reliable compared to all other. But it still is only one piece of understanding what we can do with it, because it's just like, okay, what is the expected noise when we are doing the test again and again? I definitely think that there is a huge scope of better understanding what's happening with all this technology in relation to a more gold standardized environment, to validate the proof of concept of using these technologies to make decision making in the field. And I think the best example would be that at the moment when I'm speaking with many practitioners that are using it or are trying to get a little bit of advice, they or myself cannot provide direct answer of what's going on with the athlete. And this is a problem. We don't want to gauge, we want to know, right?
Yeah. It, that's probably one of the most fascinating things about this space. It's like, how do we go from being descriptive to prescriptive as well? And I remember having lots of conversations with you about the positioning of different units throughout your PhD and stuff like that as well. So it brought back some memories there. Just even talk about muscle dampening through the limbs of different technologies and everything else. Like, and again, me and Rick
Yes.
obviously did that for 5 years as part of my PhD. So it was nice to see the work carry on with what you were doing as well.
Yeah, and look, this is it's always a little bit tricky because I felt that during my PhD, I kind of navigated across different disciplines. Purely physiology, such as VO2 maxes, running economy, and running all this modeling to understand different thresholds. Plus, looking on all this technology from a more mechanical, biomechanical overview or insight. And it's always been, I'm either not not purely physiologist or purely biomechanist, not even close. But I do want to understand what's happening with the athletes, and we cannot monitor only one piece of the puzzle. And I think, from my understanding and my experience, the conversation about all this mechanical notion is very, very chaotic at the moment. We think we know what we do, but I'm not sure we know. As I said, I've seen that there is huge improvement over the last probably even few months or 6 months. And it will be fascinating to see whether we can really, in a few years' time or even in the near future, we can really make decisions based on it, that I'll be comfortable enough to advise these to practitioners that I'm working with or an athlete that I'm working with.
Exactly. It's so difficult looking at different environments. I know your PhD focused on team sports primarily, but even when you look at different individual sports, environments, and so on, the adaptation of different submaximal protocols is probably quite relevant. I know again, like we've been talking about a basketball specific protocol with one of my PhD students, so thank you again for that. And it's so difficult to control these. Like when we think of like the continuum of ecological validity versus that pure lab based kind of stringent protocol, where do you think submaximal fitness testing is currently sitting, and where does it need to be, and really to trust the data, shall we say?
Yeah. Look, I'm the same. I came from the field, and I see myself as a practitioner first, or a researcher that the main interest is to impact practice. I think it depends on what we are looking at. If we are purely looking of what we know on the cardiovascular heart rate derived outcome measures, we are a little bit closer into the ecological validity side of the continuum, or the more practical side of the continuum, because there's been great work that has been done, and we try to do a little bit more kind of lab and field-based environment work as part of my PhD to really understand what happened in relation to a reference of a gold standard measure. And as I say, with regards to the mechanical stuff, and this is basically based on my experience purely, is that I don't really feel that we can go now to the field and collect vertical acceleration from foot-mounted data and state that this is a change in leg stiffness. I remember some of the other conversations that I had with you and some other colleagues that we are looking on the different outputs of what is the average contact time in different studies that has been reported at 12 kilometers per hour. And there is huge variability between technologies, between models, or between ways that people are analyzing the data. And when I say huge, it's almost twice or three times the value across studies. And it doesn't make sense, right? It needs to be somewhere closer that what usually happens that someone run at 12 kilometers per hour. So yeah, this is another example why at the moment I think that we need to do more work that is in the lab, but has some direct impact of the field. So we basically need again to bring all the technology that are currently used in the field to use in the lab in a more standardized environment to get good biomechanics collaborators that will help us understand some of the hard measurements that we need to make, and to take a few step backs. And again, having said that, this is only my personal opinion, and I know that people have done some really nice progress in the last 6 or 8 months.
And it's great. And like, I suppose the last point on this before we come on to bless you, um,
Thanks.
before we come on to that, it's just I do find it fascinating, even when we look at how practitioners are conducting these kind of tests in the field, and we've both seen it and discussed it. It's like you go, okay, well, are you doing it on a controlled surface, so indoor facility, artificial turf, 4G kind of thing, or are you doing it on the same pitch, different environment? So you go from a hard pitch in the middle of pre-season summer to a soft pitch in the middle of winter, and is it possible to even come up with correction equations for that as well? So from an external perspective, it's really like on the continuum, we need to make sure that if we're doing it in the applied world, how do we mitigate for the different external factors that can influence it?
Yeah, and this is not even just for the mechanical variables. Think about the heart rate variables as well. What's happened with ambient temperature or humidity or the time of the day, and whether the athlete had caffeine before the session or not. So we definitely try to mitigate it as much as possible on the day of testing, which I think anyway you need to do. Even if you do jump testing, I think that is important that you know if the player that you're testing came with the car or just to get the bus and needed to run to get the bus before the session, right? Which might happen in academy, I believe only in academy level, or need to run after the kids before coming to session. So from my experience, and maybe it's because I'm in a more stable environment compared to you guys, while trying to look at the influence of ambient temperature, humidity, even wind speed, and all this kind of thing, I didn't really find a meaningful influence that needs to be corrected in the model. Although we've recently done some work in Australian football, and we indeed found some differences. So the way that it might be corrected, if you have enough data points, you can adjust those values. You can, for example, adjust exercise heart rate values based on temperature. And for example, I think Matthew Lacombe have used a model that called heat index. But if you have enough data points per individual and you know what is the expected change, that this trend is quite hopefully linear and consistent, you can control for those changes. And this is actually another fascinating part, is whether you can even control for the changes in external load within a sub-maximal fitness test, such as box-to-box runs, that we know that athletes they cannot run exactly at 18 kilometers per hour, right?
Yeah.
And so it's always not perfectly standardized unless we are doing a continuous fashion of the submax, which I found that players quite easily pace themselves into velocity between 10 to 14 kilometers per hour, depending on their level.
Uh, you that I was smiling during the call because like you reminded me of a story, and I don't know if I told you this one before as well. Like we so when I was at my last club when we were playing in the Premier League, we basically did a 5 minute like heart rate kind of activation bike before we go out to the field and do the 4 minute sub max run, then box to box, similar kind of philosophy to what you said. And I remember I got pulled into a management meeting like during the bike. So other one of my other colleagues was running the test, and I looked at the heart rates afterwards, and they'd all spiked. I was like, what's going on?" Like, and it turns out the colleague had put the TV on just to keep them entertained, and there was the highlights of their game on. So all the players started jumping and celebrating on the bikes when they'd scored a goal, like because they won at the weekend. So it's like those kind of fun situations within team sports environments that you sometimes can't control for, but it makes our life a little bit harder. But you wouldn't want to take them away either as well. So
Yeah, of
so I
course.
suppose bringing it back to the heart rate as well, like because we ask every guest to pick a paper and publication, and you've picked out the last paper that you guys have published as well. So I know we talked about heart rate and everything within football so far, but it'd be good to, and for those that are watching highlights or listening, we'll make sure we share the paper afterwards. But it'd be good just to get your overview of why you picked this paper as well, and to summarize, like, yeah, what work went into it as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I picked this paper from two main reasons. First, which is not as exciting, is because data collection was probably during the most challenging time for my PhD, at least. It was typically in the high COVID, isolations and lockdowns there's been. So every day was with data collection was a very lucky day for me. And I think the second reason that is quite more suitable for practitioner, because I think there are so many practical applications from this paper. So basically, this paper is the final study for my PhD. It has been published a few months ago. Don't remember, probably 3 or 4 months ago.
April, is that, yeah.
Yeah, good. So I remember. And in this paper, we wanted kind of what you mentioned. We wanted to bridge the connection between lab and field. So here we focus on heart rate derived indices during and follow sub-maximal fitness test. And I think the nice thing about this paper that we first had both protocols conducted in laboratory and field conditions. So we kind of look at the agreement between lab and field submax heart rate. We've also had in the fields assessment, we had different intensities. So there was a notion that I remember that during my PhD, I was speaking a lot with people that we always assume that if you are pushing the athletes a little bit higher as part of the sub-maximal intensity, it it feels so right that you will get a better insight on what they will produce when they go maximally, because you are close into their exercise cessation. So we also wanted to pick up two different intensities, and we kind of piloted that the external stimulus in the field was around eight. The first one was about 80% of heart rate maximum, which usually is the somewhere around between 75 to 85. So we piloted about 80, which was 11 kilometers per hour. And the second intensity that was a little bit harder was about 90% of heart rate max. And based on pilot, the average velocity was 12.8 kilometers per hour. In the lab, we've done somewhere in between, which was 12 kilometers per hour. So, and also besides that, we try to, instead of just having pre and post test before and after preseason, we've basically did all these protocols every week. So we basically accumulated across 8 weeks, somewhere around 4 to 8 repeated measures per individual. And the final thing, which is I think is quite unique and novel, that we've looked on within individual changes when also comparing to laboratory-derived maximal measures that you can consider them as gold standard, such as VO2 max and maximal aerobic speed. So if I really need to summarize the main or the key finding of this paper, so first we found quite a nice correlation between laboratory and field submaximal indices. The correlation was higher for exercise heart rate compared to heart rate recovery, which makes sense. In relation to comparing submaximal measures from the lab and the field to a VO2 max and MAS. So we basically found no differences between the relationship whether the submaximal heart rate indices were collected in the lab or in the field. And regarding exercise heart rate, we found no differences between the lower to the higher intensities, which means that you don't need to push your athletes hard in order to get better insight. You can use lower intensities as well. Having said it, with regards to heart rate recovery, and we've used different approaches, or the most reliable approach following 60 seconds. And basically we found that the mean and all minimum values over the less than second of the 60 second would be the most reliable way, rather than just looking on the differences. There we found that heart rate recovery collected from the higher intensity protocol, the protocol that elicited around 90% of heart rate max at baseline, was more sensitive or was had a better relationship with changes in maximal cardiorespiratory fitness. So, yeah, I think these are the main findings, and hopefully it was clear enough.
Yeah, no, it was excellent, and thank you very much for that. It's I think that it's always good to like hear a little bit more about some of the research papers because we read the papers, but sometimes it's like anything, you try and convey the message as best as what you can, but sometimes it's good just to hear from the authors and understand like where the problems came from. Now, I suppose just to wrap this up, again, because I'm conscious of your time and we have talked for quite some time, which is great. So thank you again. Like, final question to wrap up: where do you see the future of submax testing going, and what can practitioners, researchers start to look at from the learnings that you've done? I know we talked about it briefly, but yeah, as a summary point, where do you think the future of submax testing is?
Yeah, look, I think that we know quite well about how heart rate derived indices from a submaximal fitness test are behaving. We know what are the programming variables that we need to have, usually continuous fixed protocol at about 3 to 4 minutes, and analyzing exercise heart rate as the mean heart rate over the last 30 or 60 seconds, depending on how long is your protocol. And we know that if we monitor it consistently, we can probably understand what's happening with cardiovascular fitness of the athletes. What we don't know is what's happening in acute changes or acute responses. And there are many theoretical mechanisms that can cause either increase or decrease in exercise heart rate. And this is something that I really wanted to dive into it during my PhD, but COVID literally ruined some of the plan that I had. So this is one thing. Second, most of the sub-maximal research has been conducted in male athletes. Just to give an example, in the meta-analysis we ran, there was only one paper in the validity analysis that was on female athlete, so it's less than 5%. We may assume similar trends from a physiological perspective, but also there will be some argument that it's not exactly true. So something that I think that needs to be conducted is to understand the utility of submaximal fitness tests in terms of programming variables, outcome measures in female athletes, and this is what we are trying to do a little bit more now, and also in relation to the biological nature, for example, menstrual cycle and things like that, and to see if there is an impact there, which might justify a more consistent monitoring or even use this as part of the monitoring strategies as well. And I think the final part, which it's kind of exciting for me, and we're currently writing a small paper around that, is can we take it a little bit further? Can we use what we've defined an intermittent variables protocol that basically the intensity is intermittent. We try to make it as continuous as possible, but it's still intermittent, and it's also variable. We cannot really expect changes, and this might be some research has been done using small-sided games. I'm a little bit against it because the environment that is very chaotic in terms of movement, tactics, contact, etc. But currently, we've been looking on what's happening during a standardized passing drill. So if, for example, the coach has a passing drill that is quite consistent, doesn't have to be exact consistent, we can see what's happening there because the environment or the way that the players are moving is more consistent. Theoretically, there is less variability compared to small-sided game. And if it's built good enough, it might be even create a more continuous fashion, not many work to rest ratios and things like that if you have the right numbers. And if you have enough data point and you can basically control for the changes in external or across the repeated measures. And we've discussed about environmental condition, whether we can correct for these changes. What we are trying to do now is to correct for the changes in external load and understand what are the most impactful external load variables to contribute to the changes in exercise heart rate. And some of our preliminary analysis that we are trying to write up at the moment is that we basically found that if we have enough repeated measures and enough data points, we can get similar or even better insights from the standardized drill when we are trying to infer the relationship to the variables that we collected in the lab. So if you're looking on the adjusted exercise heart rate value after controlling for external load, you may get similar relationship as you will get with continuous fixed protocol. And also the agreement between them seem to be quite consistent with the passing drill that we've chose, which was a basic Y-shaped passing drill in football that I believe every coach and practitioner have seen it before.
That's really useful, really exciting. I'm excited to hear more where that goes as well, because it opens up, as you say, there's a lot more data points that can start to come in, even looking at, for example, kicking as part of like the data point structure and how
Definitely.
does kicking affect it as well. But I just wanted to thank you for your time, Tzlil. It's been really great to speak to you. Hopefully, I've been saying your name correct throughout as well. But as always, I do
Getting better.
yeah, thank you to everyone for listening. Really appreciate your time, Lil, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Cheers.